meeting of Wednesday, January 15th, 2020 to order. Let the record show that we are missing 3 commissioners, Mr. Bush, Mr. Karski, and Mr. Franchuk. First thing on the agenda, Mr. Hadley, is there any changes to the order of business?
Mr. Chairman, good morning. No, there aren't any changes to the order of business.
Okay. Hearing that there's no change to the order of business, do we have a motion to approve the order as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve them.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to approve the order of business. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. First item on the agenda would be the minutes of the previous session from November 20, 2019. Does anybody have any changes or comments regarding the minutes presented? There's no changes. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the minute as presented.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
And a second. All those in favor to approve the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, our first action item on the agenda today is to consider a request for a rezone on a property located at Lot 1B, Block 1, Come and Go Addition, from community commercial to low-density residential, and low-density residential, to general commercial. Mr. Hadley.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This just a little overview on this for past history. In 2013, this item came before the Planning Commission. It was rather controversial. There was a truck stop that was planned in this area. It was directly east of the Come and Go right now. They were going to expand that and make a truck stop out of it. Prior to me, but in reading the information, it looked like it was rather controversial and the city did not support it. So in 2016, fast forward, similar application came through. There was actually a recommendation from the Planning Commission to approve, but it was for, the intent was a car lot, I believe. And the item never did go to City Commission for approval because the proposed new facility wasn't going to come into Dickinson. So today what we're hearing is the same request on this 3.43 acre parcel that has kind of a split zone, community commercial and low density residential. And they want to go to general commercial. Really, the zoning from 10th Avenue East all the way to the interstate along the business loop on both sides is general commercial. This is the only spot that is community commercial in that entire corridor. Staff, obviously, if you read through the review, would recommend approval of this request and feel it's just kind of putting this parcel in connection with the rest of the parcels that are from there to the interstate. The applicant does have some uses planned on there that are very applicable, kind of a low-end use of the general commercial zoning. I think it would fit in there well. It isn't a truck stop, and actually there probably isn't enough room on this site to do a truck stop the way it's configured it currently anyway. So with that, I believe the applicant is in the audience as well. Might want to have him fill in any blanks that he might want to, and then I can answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hadley. The applicant would like to come forward, make any comments. Mr. Tews.
Good morning, Tracy Tews with TCB Rentals. I don't have any comments unless you have any questions. I think you described what happened in the past. We didn't own the property when it was going to be a truck stop.
2013, yeah.
And 16 we owned it. Red Rock Ford was interested in that parcel and then moved on and did what they did now. So.
Can you kind of give us an idea what use you're going to look at?
So what we're looking at doing is building basically 30 by 80, 30 by 90 man caves. Special use for, we own a few of them in Bismarck ourselves. And you write the HOA as such as you don't have a welding shop, no outside storage, just essentially nice little 30 by 90 units to store cars or, you know, your stuff from your house, boat, whatever. They go over really well. We actually have interest in about 6 of them already.
So the proposed layout on here is not what you're,
No, the proposed layout, it has not changed.
Well,
The one that was
there's a
submitted.
proposed building on here, a 240 by,
Yep,
Oh, yeah,
80 by
that-
240.
Okay,
And
that's-
we divide them into 30-foot bays, 80 wide, 30 by 80,
okay.
with the first one up to the east side of the property, kind of towards Ladberry's property.
Commissioners, any questions?
Yeah, I have a
Choose.
question. Would, like campers or motorhomes, would that fit in those too?
They're not really designed for like a big fifth wheel setup, and you space the buildings as such, or else you kind of get a different kind of rental that we're not looking for in that.
So more for boats and cars?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Just for everyone's information as well, it's in our corridor overlay, so there will be some corridor standards facing
Correct.
the business loop for decorative lighting, some facade improvements and that type of thing that I believe Mr. Hughes knows of, but they will be an attractive addition along that corridor.
Mr. Toots, are you expecting to have water and sewer service to the building then?
Yes.
Anyone else? How many units do you think you'll get on there, Tracy?
Well, we did a site layout with GT Architect, and we could actually fit about 24 units on there. That's not our intent right away. Our intent is to do the first 80 by 240, which is, my math's not with me this morning, 8 units, excuse me.
All right. I don't have any additional questions. Anyone else? Mr. Kubis, Mr. Hadley, no further comments?
I don't, sir. Thank you.
With that, thank you, Mr. Hughes. Commissioners, I'd look for a motion unless you have any other questions or comments you'd like to make first.
Mr. Chairman, we do need to have a public.
Oh, apologize. Since this is a zone change, we will have a public hearing, so at this time, we will open the public hearing on this zone change. If anybody in the public has any comments or concerns regarding this zoning change, please step forward and at this time. Anyone in the public has any comments, please step forward. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Now we will go back to commissioners.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Bollinger, sorry.
move the City of Dickinson Planning and Zoning Commission recommend approval of REZ-001-20 petition to rezone the subject property from community commercial and R1 to general commercial as being compliant with the City of Dickinson comprehensive plan as meeting all the requirements of the City of Dickinson Municipal Code and also being in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare.
Second that?
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving this zoning change, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Tews. Here, the next item on the agenda, looks like that's the end of our action items. Oh, I guess we have one more. The next thing on our agenda is the Article 39.09 off-street parking proposed revisions. This is to consider a proposed amendment to the City of Dickinson Municipal Code, Article 39.09 off-street parking. And looks like Planner Josephson is going to handle that for us this morning.
Yes, unless Planning Director Hadley wants to add some comments as introduction to this. Okay.
No,
Commissioner.
you go ahead.
Okay,
Stephen.
good morning,
I'll add.
Good morning, Commissioners. Steve Josephson. What you have in front of you, is, as we discussed previously, the staff is going through the Chapter 39 of the zoning ordinance and looking at ways to update and amend the ordinance. This was something that we had brought to you a few months ago. The primary change in this, in proposed in this ordinance is it would allow for developers to request a reduction in the minimum parking requirements found in the code. There are two things in here. One of them is that instead of using gross square footage to determine parking spaces, we'd use net square footage, so that would be the actual usable area of a building. And then the other thing would be that a developer could come and request a reduction of the number of required spaces. They'd have to have a justification for it. The way that we looked at ordinances in some other communities here in North Dakota and modeled it after that, this could either be done administratively or it could be granted by planning and zoning. If the request is for up to 25 spaces or up to 25% of what the minimum requirement would be, that could be granted administratively. If it was more than that, then it would come to Planning and Zoning Commission for your review and your decision as to whether or not to grant it. And this is part of what we've discussed this at previous workshops. This is part of a movement across the country in cities where cities are finding that in a lot of instances it's costly to developers to develop the amount of space, and many times it's not utilized. It also can take land out that could be used for other development by having it used for parking. There are situations where if a use wants to expand, they'll acquire a perfectly fine building that could be used for something else and demolish that. So we're looking, and certainly as you drive around the community, you can find examples of recent commercial developments where the parking lots are not full even on the busiest times of the year. So we've brought this forward to you. We haven't made any changes from the last workshop that we held, and here to get any comments you may have, for any comments, and then any comments from the public.
My only comment still is, why does it have to come to planning and zoning? Isn't that what the Board of Adjustment does?
I think in planning and zoning is because a lot of times the parking is related to planning issues and to planning projects, and that's why it would come to planning and zoning.
Just to maybe clarify a little bit, like Dickinson Hills, let's say, if they came in to amend their PUD, which they may, it would come to this board, and part of their plan, since it's a PUD, it would have a variance built in, if you will, that this board would consider. That would never go to the Board of Adjustment. So this just allows, on a day-to-day basis, staff to work with, whether it be, say, Mr. Tews with this project, maybe he's short one space from his layout of what we would require, rather than having a project like that having to go through a formal process that really, for all intents and purposes, doesn't provide any gain either for them or for us. It would allow ourselves to look at it. We probably would take it to site planning, which is our weekly meeting with all of the departments, and discuss it there before there would be a determination made. But it just gives us some flexibility. And I think, we've talked about it over the past number of months. Our parking standards over the years, and over many years, we're overparked. You look at even places that are busy in Dickinson, the parking lots are much greater in size than they really need to be. And some of them are, Walmart, I'll use an example, they probably knew that they needed 225 spaces. They probably put in 375 because that's what they do everywhere. That, you know, some people are going to do that and they're going to choose to do that. Other people probably would take advantage of not having to put in that extra hard surface. Maybe put in a little more landscaping, maybe just have an area that could be redeveloped for outlots, similar to the mall, Jimmy John's and some of that stuff that was put in. The mall is a perfect example of well overparked. If that back property ever develops to the southwest of the mall, I would highly suggest that would be one that would be something that we would definitely look at, using that hardscape parking that's there to service that. So there's many examples through town, and it's something that can be handled relatively easy. I don't know that it really is a big issue, and I doubt the Board of Adjustment would mind that they don't have to hear a variance for 2 spaces in a convenience store. So
I don't know if I have a problem with the under 25%. Let's say Walmart wants to redo their parking lot and relay it out, and now they're going to be 50 spaces short of what is required. Who's going to hear that? It'll be over 25%. So who's going to hear that?
You would hear that.
Why?
Because if they were going to redo their site, which they are, it's a great example to bring up, because in the next 3 years or so, they're going to come in with a redevelopment of that, because you're going to be involved with the redesign and relayout of that particular site. So you're going to be intimately involved with it.
But they're not asking for a zoning change or anything, so why would this board hear it, is what I'm trying to get at. I mean, if they just want to lay out their parking lot, why would it come to us? I'm not sure. This board is for approving zoning changes, plats, not a parking lot change. I'm just trying to follow the procedure here. Why?
Well, it depends on the application. You would be if it, you know, they are going to come in with some major changes. Right now, currently, they don't meet our corridor standards whatsoever, and they've been put on notice that they don't meet them. They are going to have some major reworking of that store, and you will see that corridor stuff will be addressed. Might include a plat, might include some other things that they need to do. I don't know as of right now, but I know there's some big changes coming there that you would be involved with. So if you're involved with it, I guess the thought was, if this board is involved with it, that this board should be the one that's more intimately involved in that final decision. It's your choice. I mean, if you don't want to do it, that's great, but I'm just
trying to understand. Let's take Prairie Hills Mall for an example. They relayed out their whole parking lot. What if they wanted to reduce those spots? Why would that come to us? I mean, we didn't have any say in it in the first place. So, I mean,
well, yeah, you did. Whenever that mall was put in, you probably did.
Well, originally,
yeah,
in 1970 or whatever, probably.
Yeah, whoever it was.
But I mean, we didn't have any say in it when they just relayed it out.
But what they'll probably come in with there is those parcels to the southwest that they want to redevelop, or outlot parcels in the existing lot. We probably would be involved in all of that. So as part of that, the parking lot would be a portion of that proposed redevelopment, and it would be the ability for this board or staff to work with them and allow them this variance to utilize the parking that they have. So it's difficult to pin down a particular project if we don't have the specifics on that particular site, but what I'd say is the mall is a perfect example of a place that we most definitely would be involved, because I think that they would come in with some sort of a special plan, because they almost need to maximize the use of that site. So this board would most definitely be involved with that.
Wouldn't that be part of more of the permit process, though, than
sorry,
rezoning? Wouldn't that be more of when they apply for the permit, they bring that forward to you? And then you review it for the permit, or why would it have to go in front of the zoning?
Not so much a building permit, no. I mean, yeah, that's the final improvement of the site, is the building permit. If they come in and do a PUD, let's say, to re-situate, which I would probably highly suggest and want them to. The first step would be to work with staff, they'd put an application in, they'd bring it to you, this board, have a public hearing on it. There'd be recommendations based on what those uses were and what types of outlots and how it was going to function. And you would make a recommendation based on that to the city commission. So, I mean, on something that large, you know, the below, the 25% and below, administratively, you wouldn't see, obviously. No, you wouldn't see that. But we're talking, you know, they probably have 100 spaces of extra parking there that we could spread out to those parcels to the southwest, to outlots. Maybe the back of that facility winds up being just as busy as the front. Whereas right, you know, I mean, that would be our hope.
We've just never seen parking in this board before. I mean, we have it laid out in our code what's required, and if they want to request less, if they're changing a zone or redoing a whole plat, I get it, but if, let's say Walmart wants to just repave their parking lot, instead of going north to south, they want to go east to west, and now they're 100 spots short of what's required, that has to come to us? I don't-
If it was a planned unit development, yeah, that would come to you. If it's just that they're gonna resurface and redo the parking lot, no, Runnings just did that. But
Then
that-
who would get that request then?
that being said, we have gone through this, and honestly, it hasn't worked real well. Runnings did this a few years ago. The mall did this a few years ago, on just repaving and redoing their parking lot. I believe they probably put in a request, I don't know if it went through engineering, but even if we have a formal request, they just started redoing their parking lot. Their parking lots, they were removing their landscaping areas, some of the areas that were required back when that was put in, long before, you know, us right now. So I think that's another hole that probably would be addressed, that, you know, some of the parking, if you go to Cashwise, not necessarily works as well as it could. If Mr. Kubis was involved in that, I think it probably would have worked a little better.
I get Mr. Gubis being involved, I don't get why we're involved.
Well, if
So-
if he's involved, it may be something that you're involved with, or it may not, I guess is what we're saying, is that it depends on the scope, it depends on what we're doing. It could just be Mr. Kubis and our staff, and then the building department being involved with it, but then it might escalate to something that you would be involved with.
Chairman Fredericks, we did after, you know, I think the mall was a good example of what happened, you know, 3, 4, 5 years ago. We created another permit, which everyone hates to hear, and you know, feel like we're trying to, you know, step on these developments a little bit, but we created a permit that's a site development permit. It's $40 for the hopes that, you know, folks would come in and say, hey, we're going to redo our parking lot. Here's our $40 permit, and that we would be able to sit down and work with them, because I think the mall is kind of the example that's in everyone's mind of, boy, somebody spent a considerable amount of money, and I don't think a lot of people are terribly happy with how that parks today, where we could have stretched spaces and maybe lost a few spaces, maybe lost quite a few spaces, and created an overall better parking spot. I don't have a personal feeling on which board would review a large variance request if it were Board of Adjustments or this board. I really don't have a personal feeling either way. I could be involved in that on both ends, so
It's just-
leave it up to this
This
board.
board seems to be awfully cumbersome for something that simple, that's the only thing. With the requirements of checklists and requirements and advertising, it takes a long time to get to see us sometimes, you know, on something that simple, where the Board of Adjustment can be called up within a week's notice, and if it's something that needs to get done fast. That's my only kind of concern on it, I guess. I just don't understand why. I mean, we might as well see every adjustment then, if we're gonna start seeing every little thing here. I mean, I get it if it's part of a plat request, but in the past, even this board hasn't made any decisions on parking. That's always been engineering, because it's been in our code, what's required. So,
Yes and no. Dickinson Hills, you did, because it was part of a PUD There are developments that we have reviewed that included a plan for parking, landscaping, whatever. That was quite an extensive, that was right before me, but I was involved with it at the end. So, yeah, we actually have. And that was part of the actual site plan, part of what their proposal was, so we definitely would be involved in that. Whether it not necessarily was based on number of parking spaces, it was based on design and how it worked. So,
Mr. Chairman, if I could, maybe that's the answer. What Mr. Hadley just said there is that if it's part of a PUD, that it's something that this board is going to have to see. If it's just part of a site plan, we'd either handle it administratively with buildings and planning and engineering, or it would come in front of the Board of Adjustments as
If it's over that
a building
threshold or
type
something, yeah.
variance they're requesting.
Okay, yeah, that's all, I guess that's the only comments I have. So, anybody else have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I did have just one other
Sure.
small comment, maybe two. In section 3909.002, we just talked about the parking in general needs to be all-weather hard surface material. I know we have that same language in other parts of other codes. I'd really like to try and get away from it and just say a paved surface. And whether that's concrete or asphalt, I think paved, everyone's kind of on the same page that that's going to be asphalt or concrete.
I suppose there could be the argument that crushed concrete could be an all-weather paved or all-weather hard surface.
Yep, it always is. And then my other comment, just in general, and sorry, just thought about it as we were talking, and Mr. Hadley brought up the example of Walmart. What if they wanted to go down to, or what if they wanted to have 500 parking spots because that was their new corporate standard? Could we, or do we want this ordinance to limit on both ends, a minimum and a maximum? Because I think that was the whole intent, was to try and reduce the size of these parking lots and put the land to a better use, whether that's more building space instead of parking area. If we had someone come in that requested some, we usually don't, but I think there are some big box retails that maybe have a minimum standard that might be well above our new minimum, and do we want to try and pull them into what we think is now reasonable? That's what we're trying to do with the ordinance, is to reduce these sizes. But I don't know if we want to push that hard.
Would you want to, I mean, are your thoughts that we should restrict the top end?
Like I said, I hadn't thought about it a lot. It's just, that's the intent of what we were trying to do here, I think, a few months ago when we brought it forward. So
if I could jump
you
in.
could make a strong suggestion, I guess.
Yeah, if I could jump in a little bit, I think, I had that thought, and what Stephen and I have had that conversation. One thing that we could do, and I, don't know if that'd be something you'd be interested in or not, if someone wanted to exceed it, that we would require additional landscaping. Or be something to break it up or buffer it a little bit from neighboring properties and just the public passing by. I mean, that would be something we could do, or we could just say no, as what Mr. Kubis is saying. I mean, it's totally up to you guys on what you think that would be appropriate, but there's many ways we could deal with that, and if we wanted to allow more, it would be very safe to say that most of those places, or all of those places that wanted to do that, would probably do some enhanced landscaping if we required it.
Commissioners, I guess I'm indifferent on this.
So you're suggesting that you have actual paved driveways instead of all-weather material?
That would be my recommendation, yes.
So how about like some of these divisions in town where the city has crushed asphalt instead of paved roads going to businesses? Would that have to be done in pavement then too?
It certainly should be, and I don't know if you have an example, but
Well,
I have a few in my mind that we're
right in front of
working on.
Viking Glass, I mean, I did all concrete,
That's,
and it's crushed pavement. Everybody's vehicles get muddy and dirty coming in there?
It absolutely should be
Yeah.
paved on both ends, the cities and the private businesses, so.
I mean, if you're gonna make the businesses do it, yeah, the city
Yep.
should follow.
And Viking Glass put in a beautiful concrete parking lot, and I don't think we've met our end of the deal on that.
Mr. Chairman, another
Mr.
area
Becker.
that should have been taken care of long ago that we're dealing with now as a city is right off of 21st. Front of Justin Glass, that continuing through, that's another area right there. Probably should have been fixed a long time ago.
Agreed, yeah, we had that, well, it got subdivided whenever, many decades ago. And then we were working with some of the landowners to pave that. Some of it did, and some of it didn't. And at the time, you know, the city, our policy was, we don't pay for that initial construction. And we'd come back in and maintain it, and maybe we need to relook at, you know, picking up some of these loose ends from decades past that are really just an eyesore, not for the businesses, but also for the public.
Any other comments, commissioners? So we don't, are we supposed to have a for open public hearing on this in the
Yes,
first reading?
this is a public hearing.
All right, we'll move on. We'll open the public hearing regarding the parking ordinance. If anybody in the public has any comments or concerns regarding Article 3909 off-street parking ordinance, please step forward, state your name. Mr. Schwint?
Leonard Schwint, building official for the city of Dickinson. Just one note in there, just reading, I just want to make sure that we're very clear as far as what type of a driveway going into lots, especially on personal vehicles. Right now, we ask that people park their boats, campers off the city streets, especially this time of year. If we're going to mandate that there be a hard surface going into a lot, I just see that's problematic. Then we're going to have driveways without houses, and we're going to have people parking campers in the front yard setback. So I don't know if that was the intent of that, but it just depends on how you read that as far as personal parking. Right now, we allow people to park into their rear yards. A lot of times they put some scoria back there or some blocks. There are a lot of vehicles on grass surfaces, but they're off our right-of-way. So if they're in a neat manner, we generally don't address it.
Okay. Mr. Schwint, thoughts on that? Anyone?
Mr. Chairman, the way I read the ordinance, talks about paved off-street parking shall be provided for any new building constructed. So maybe, you know, if there was a shed or a storage unit, that might be an issue, but if it was just, I'm taking my boat off the street to park it in my yard, I don't know that this would apply.
If you go, I'm sorry, Steve Josephson, if you go to section 39.09008, which is parking for personal and recreational vehicles, it does say in there the parking space is provided on paved, gravelled, scoria, or rock surface, if that's what you're talking about for personal vehicles.
Right.
Yeah, that hasn't changed.
Okay. All right, anything?
Just in the first section, the first statement, as far as parking for personal vehicle, I just want to make sure that we understand that we don't have to have a driveway to those areas.
Yeah, we're talking about, the proposed changes apply to commercial, you know, to non-residential development.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Schwint?
That's it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that's addressed then. I think what? But in the, 39.09.002, I mean, it talks about boats, motorhomes, campers, mobile homes. Required spaces not be used to display goods for sale. Okay. That's more to the commercial side we were talking, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, we could clarify that.
Yep. All right, the public hearing's still open. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to make comment? Please step forward. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Commissioners, any more questions or comments for Mr. Hadley or Mr. Josephson?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing I'd have to say is Mr. Josephson and myself have talked to some developers. He reached out to start development as well. They were in support of this concept of doing it. I think overall you're going to have a welcoming. Dickinson Hills, I believe, too. Mr. Kubis actually reached out to them, and they're interested in it, but we haven't really seen anything from them that wants them to move forward on it. Maybe they're waiting for this process to go through.
They want this in place. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that it will be widely accepted by the development community as a tool that not only will save them money, but maybe maximize development in our tax base as well.
Okay. Commissioners? No other comments? I'd entertain a motion.
The one thing, I'm sorry, Commissioners, if you're going to make, since you had that discussion about process, about administrative and then process, if you're going to make any changes, if you're going to recommend any changes, this is the time to do it. I still stand by, I'm sure Planning Director Hadley and I stand by what we have in what we have in here in terms of the process. There are communities in North Dakota where it does go to the Planning and Zoning Commission for any if a reduction exceeds a threshold. But it's whatever direction you feel is best. We can make the changes.
I just feel if it's just a redevelopment of a parking lot, and there's no plat changes or building changes, there's no reason it needs to come to this board.
For the greater than 25%.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're gonna
That's all I
make the change, if you're gonna do that, that'll be part of your motion to amend that.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other changes? Not, I'd look for a motion.
I'm not sure what I'm making a motion on.
To approve this?
To approve this with the amended changes?
With the amend, if you want to amend it, that just, parking lot redevelopments don't need to come to this board if it's, I don't know how you want to word that, but.
We cross out P and Z and we insert, we insert BOA.
Probably just any proposed development that has a parking deviation greater than 25%, that isn't part of a plat, a PUD, or any other item that this commission would review, those items would go to the Board of Adjustment for a variance.
Okay.
That's as vague as it can be, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's fine. I think that gets the point across of what you're trying to do. So if Brandy's able to write that down in a motion, I think that'd be acceptable.
We'll channel Brandy.
That's your motion?
That's my motion.
So approve that with that additional verbiage.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Chairman.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, that is the last action item for the day. The next item comes into our work session. And item 1 is the master plan of Section 32 north of I-94 in Northwest Dickinson. Mr. Kubis will introduce this for us.
Thank you, Chairman Frederick. This was actually a work item that was budgeted by our city commission for 2019. We engaged Highlands Engineering, who will give this presentation, to do some master planning as in regards to layouts and potential proposed zonings for this area. And I guess to better describe the area, so this is what people commonly see as the NDSU extension land north of I-94. Our city water tank, the stainless steel tank, sits on this piece of ground just north of the interstate. The Sierra Ridge Apartments are in this area, although we didn't really touch what that land is being used as now through this master plan. The other owners would be the city of Dickinson, who owns the very, very northwest corner, just west of the middle school. There is one small piece of privately owned land just south of the Sierra Ridge Apartments, and then a large portion of it in the east half of this piece of ground is owned by the Dickinson Public School District Number 1. So we've talked to NDSU and the school district about what we were looking at doing here, and have visited with both of them about it. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew Schrank with Highlands Engineering. He can kind of go through the report that they put together for the city. And one other note, that this is the first public introduction of this plan. We have met with a few of the property owners to discuss it, but this is kind of the first viewing, so.
Okay, Mr. Schrank?
Thank you, Craig. Again, Andrew Schrank with Highlands Engineering. I want to thank the city for allowing us to work on this project. We had a lot of fun with it, and I think in cooperation with city staff, we really came up with a great plan that's going to help guide the development of this area. So when we first looked at this, we wanted to make sure this was a useful plan for the city. We've seen a lot of plans in the past that have been kind of 2D laid out. They look great on paper, but you try to lay them out on the property, and there's a lot of issues. Water's draining uphill, there's massive hills to move. So we want to make sure that this plan really worked with the land that we have out there. So we took a look at this from a 3D aspect. We consider items such as grading, road slopes, drainage, utilities, access, and just made sure it really works with its current conditions. So with that, we'll go through a little PowerPoint here, providing a brief overview of the project site, some of its current conditions, some of the items that we use to help lay this out, and then some key features of our plan that you guys should consider moving forward as this site develops. So Craig kind of ran through this. This is the project site shown in orange, again, bordered by Interstate on the south, 30th Avenue West to the west, 21st Street West would be the northern boundary, and then State Avenue to the east. And then as Craig said, there is a Sierra Ridge apartment complex kind of in the northeast corner that we didn't really do anything with. And then the Dickinson Middle School lies kind of along the north side as well. The total orange area that you see is about 370 acres. Again, this is just kind of an aerial image, a little closer up of the property, showing its current uses as well as the current boundary lines. So the properties Craig had mentioned, you've got about 13 acres in the north that's owned by the city. That's the only part of this that's currently platted. It's Prairie Meadows subdivision. There's 105 acres owned by NDSU, and also another 115 on the south that's owned by NDSU. This Dickinson Public School owns 113 acres, kind of in northeast area, and then the private portion that Craig talked about is about 20 acres on the east side, owned by a gentleman named Timothy Gardner. As far as current uses, it's essentially agricultural today. There are 2 well pads on the western side of the site, and then the water tank in the middle of the site there. There are a couple roads built, 19th Street West on the south side of the city property, or I'm sorry, yes, 19th Street West, and then 29th Avenue West is a north-south route. And then there's about a half road south of Sierra Ridge that's also 19th Street West. This shows some of the contours and the elevations that we took into consideration. The higher elevations shown are kind of the reddish and orange elevations. And as you get away from that, you see the bluish purple is kind of the lower elevations. So there is a central ridge line kind of through the middle of the site with a high point elevation of around 2,620 feet. And then as you move away from that to the east and west, the site falls about 140 feet in elevation. There's a little bit of a drop on the south as well, about 100 feet. Some of the current drainage patterns, the Dickinson Middle School actually has a pond kind of on their east line that drains through this area. There's another smaller drainage that kind of comes down the southern portion, and then the west generally drains off to the southwest. Some of the site slopes, if you look at this map, the bluish purple areas are pretty gradual slopes, usually less than 5%. And that takes up a lot of the perimeter of the site. As you get to the center of the site, you'll see the more cyan and green colors. Those have elevation or slopes closer to 10 to 15% or more, and are a little bit less conducive to development. Next, we'll show some items from your comprehensive plan, your 2035 comp plan. The first is the city's future land use map. This shows some of the proposed land uses that you had at the time that report was prepared for this site. The red, shown in the southwest and southeast corners, is commercial. The yellow shows residential. That was proposed kind of at the northeast side of the site. And the remaining was shown as a mixed use, kind of the northwest and southeast portions. The red and yellow stripes are proposed as mixed use. This is the current zoning map. Essentially everything, like we said, is undeveloped and used for ag. The southern NDSU property is currently zoned public, and the private property on the east is zoned for high-density residential on its northern side, and then commercial kind of along where 15th Street would continue through. This is another slide from the comprehensive plan showing the proposed streets for the city of Dickinson. One thing to note around the perimeter are mainly arterial streets. 30th Avenue is a principal arterial, 21st and State Avenue are dedicated as minor arterials. The dashed purple lines you see are proposed collector routes. So there's a proposed collector kind of connecting the east and west through the center of the property, and another connecting out to the north. So with all that, we wanted to identify first some of the access points into this site to start our layout. So we looked at the existing access points that are provided. You have 15th Street is currently proposed at 30th Avenue West, as well as at State Avenue. So those would be two potential access points. 19th Street West, that half road that's constructed south of Sierra Ridge, is providing access. Also the intersection on the south side of, southeast side of the city property, being 29th Avenue and 19th Street West. Those are fairly evident current access points into this site. There's another one just east of the middle school where the city has kind of a residential approach constructed. And then there's also two driveways that are shown by these red X's. Those aren't really residential road approaches, they're more of a commercial driveway. So those would likely need to get removed and then replaced with kind of these two green arrows would be proposed access points onto 21st Street that we identified. So there we needed to look at what types of right-of-way are going to be required for streets in this subdivision. So again, we went back to your comprehensive plan. Currently, the city requires the top section for commercial and collector routes, which is an 80-foot right-of-way. Your local streets are a 70-foot right-of-way. And then we started to lay out these streets and lots on this property, keeping these right-of-way widths, access points, contours, all of that in mind as we laid this out. The first road we started with was 15th. You know, that's going to be a collector route, so we wanted to make sure that that works through here. We tried to target kind of a low point between two ridge lines to keep these grades manageable. I think we came up just under 6% on this road. So that was the first route we laid out. And then from there, we started to lay out the collector routes off of that. We wanted to, again, keep into mind contours, look at the drainage, make sure runoff can be conveyed through these streets to the ponds, making sure sanitary sewer flows are going to work to get to their connection points. And we also looked at the lot widths. You know, we looked at, for this residential area here, we wanted to make sure the lot widths made sense. So we generally tried to target around an 80-foot lot width with 120-foot depth. There's obviously some variance to that, but that was in general what we were trying to get. We did have, a little smaller lots along your artillery roads on the perimeter of the site, which may not be as highly desirable. Once you get to the central ridge line, you get a little better views. Those might be a little more desirable, larger lots as you get to the interior of the site. We did leave this central ridge line mostly undeveloped for a few issues, one being the site slopes that we looked at before, the other being water pressures. We're getting pretty close in elevation to this water tank as you get up that hill, so there's likely going to be a portion of this that's not currently serviceable with water. On the west side here, you'll notice the 2 well pads. So we did try to weave this road through those 2 well pads to get as much buildable space in there as we can. This shows some of the site drainage that we took into consideration. This is part of the preliminary engineering plans that we prepared with this report. This also had some road profiles and stuff laid out in these plans that we're not going to show you today for sake of time. But basically you'll see these blue boundaries show areas that will drain to a central location. So for example, this boundary that I'm showing here would drain to this pond. We identified a boundary and a pond for each of these, so we know where this runoff needs to get to. It'll help you in phasing and planning for how this runoff should be routed through these sites. One thing we wanted to note, I know there's been a lot of talk recently about regional ponds for development. And I think there's a couple concepts you could look at for regional ponds here. The first being kind of this north example. We really tried to keep in mind subdivision lines as we laid this out. So this is the Dickinson Public Schools property. This would be the NDSU property. It's likely these will be developed separately. But you'll notice runoff from this site is going through the Dickinson Public Schools site to a proposed pond. That is a regional pond, but it does serve 2 different sites. Typically when this site develops, the city would collect some land, have that developer build a pond, and put that pond on their site. So that would be one regional concept. The second would be what we're showing here, where you're putting a pond on somebody else's property. So if you want to do that, there's likely some policies that would have to be established to make these larger, grander regional ponds. Otherwise, we'd have to kind of stick with what we're doing now, as each development would have its own pond. So just something to think about as we move forward with stormwater ordinance revisions and some of those items. This is another sheet from our preliminary engineering plans showing water and sewer layouts. The sewer is shown in green, water shown in blue. We'll go through this pretty quick, but just wanted to mention, fairly critical would be connections between development. If this site comes and develops first, we now know, okay, how are we going to have to go to route that sewer to connect back to our city infrastructure? This may also be useful in city models. If we want to see how much sewer is coming to each of our connection points in our current system, we can model how many lots may be going there, figure out the flows, and make sure we have capacity in the perimeter infrastructure. So with that, we've got a quick little video here. We're going to do a little flyover of our site. Hopefully we can get this to work. I spurred this on your tech staff this morning and we're having some troubles, so we'll see what we can do here. Looks like it's being a little jumpy. And as we fly through, you can kind of see some of the higher elevations on the site. Through this area, it's fairly steep. It gets a little more gradual as you get to the perimeter. You'll see kind of our proposed pond locations. Those would likely not be water as shown. It's just kind of representation. Here you can see the Dickinson Middle School property. This would be the city property. The yellow lines you see are kind of the current boundary lines. The green lines would be our block lines that we're proposing. This would be the Sierra Ridge apartment complex, kind of looking south and flying around looking west now. This shows the proposed zoning that we laid out. So hopefully that provides a little scale and shows you some of the 3D aspects that we were looking at as we laid out the site. Excellent. So once again, here's the master plan that we came up with. We want to note that this is just a guide for development. We know it's probably going to change. It's going to have to evolve over time, but it's really going to be a good tool to use as developers come forward. There are definitely some aspects of this that are more critical than others. You know, some of those being 15th Street is going to be fairly fixed. Your access points are fairly fixed. So we really want you guys to key in on some of those aspects. But some of these local routes, you know, if they shift, change, some developers may want to add or remove some of those routes. They may have different lot sizes in mind. That's completely acceptable. We don't want to make this set in stone. We want it to help guide that development. And as changes come forward, we just want to make sure you keep in mind how it affects neighboring properties. You know, if this is the first property to develop and they want to change their roads, how does that affect the next property? With access, with water, with sewer, drainage. We want to make sure all that works for the development as a whole.
So, Mr. Schrank, where's the best place to start if we had a developer come in?
Probably east or west, just being that there's current infrastructure there. You know, as I keep kind of mentioning this site,
Yeah.
it relies a lot on the property to the east to develop. So it could happen, but it's going to take a lot of cooperation between landowners to get sewer, to get drainage, to get a lot of those things to work. So it's fairly easy to start. I think you have sewer in these streets and you have sewer connections over here. It's probably the easiest to start there and work in, but that may be dictated by the developers as well, who wants to start first.
Right.
So,
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Schrank, I know you said that you brought all the players together, the public school system and NDSU. In the past, NDSU has always been not so much that they want to sell their property, but trade for other properties. Was that ever discussed?
and I'll be honest, I think Craig had more of those conversations. Highlands wasn't too involved in those discussions, so I'll probably default to Craig there.
So Mayor Decker, when we undertook this project, they were just transitioning from their longtime director, Mr. Ringwald, to an interim director, which, you know, at the time, they didn't even have the interim director. So we met with a staff member, but I think you're correct, that's still their position is that they would, you know, really want nothing to do with this. They were okay with this planning process, and they've told us that in the past, that we're all for planning, it's just not what we do. We do ag research. The individual we met with had no discussions about trading for land. Really, you know, and I think in the past that's come through legislative action where they've been giving the direction or the ability to sell off land to buy other land, which they did with the middle school and the property the city bought. I don't know that we've got much clear direction from them on how they would like to proceed or not proceed with anything in regards to this land, but I think that's all the more important. So we're reaching out to our legislators to say this is, it's to me, just a great piece of land that would fit well into the city. It connects pieces of the city we already have with the stuff east of State Avenue and Westridge. In a perfect world, it probably would have developed many years ago, but of course, you know, when land is outside your ownership, we kind of get what we get sometimes at this board. And that was a lot of the reasoning of wanting to undertake this project. So when someone, assuming it's not the city, someone else gets a hold of this, we have a plan that we can show them and give them some direction on what we'd like to see this become. So as far as NDSU goes, I think they're still in their search for a new director who might be more aggressive one way or the other. I don't think they have that person in place yet, so.
I will say too, we do show, you've probably noticed this darker green kind of hatched area here. That was a spot that we laid out about 15 acres for a potential school site. I guess Highlands personally didn't coordinate with the school on that site. We just placed that there from a planning perspective, thinking, you know, it's at the intersection of two collectors. There's pretty good access. It's not so close to the Dickinson Middle School that we're, you know, causing traffic issues there. We have a little bit of separation, but that may not be what they have in mind for a school site. So just wanted to make that note as well.
Well, the walkability index would be very high for development here with a elementary school there and a middle school in that area. If that residential area would develop around it, essentially any family buying a house in that area could anticipate, at least for the first 8 years of their children's lives, they could basically walk to school in that area.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
You have to be an elementary and a middle school right there.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, Mayor Decker, to the point about elementary school in this property overall, we have visited with the school district. They're certainly interested. We all know they need another elementary school. This is an area they're looking at. I think, to leave it in real general terms, they'd like something more turnkey because their needs are pretty immediate for that new school. Of course, like Mr. Schrank said, we have a lot of infrastructure to build. Very little of this is here in between State and 30th and 21st and the interstate. So to get to that, you know, shaded or hatched green area would take some significant input by either the city or a private developer.
Mr. Kubis, that 15th Street connector, if the city would, if that was something that we would undertake on our own, just that strip, do we have an estimated cost?
I do not at this time. Trying to put it in terms of some other projects that we built similar to that. It wouldn't be nearly as big a street as, you know, 21st Street and State Avenue that we built north of here. And same with the sewer sizing. Again, we're starting at the top of a hill. We don't have a massive drainage area that we're picking up as far as sewer is concerned. But I'm sure we'd, you know, even if we just built the west half of that, we'd be at a few $1 million at least. The nice thing about it is it's easy construction. We're in the middle of a field right now. So.
That is one thing we did talk a little bit about with Mr. Kubis. There are some challenges on 15th Street West, especially from a developer's aspect. You know, one being this is kind of a shared line on the west side, similar to what you had on the west side of 30th, where two developers are going to have to come together and build that road. The other thing you'll notice, most of the residential lots and most of the lots, we put backing onto 15th Street to keep those access points limited on 15th since it is a collector. So this would be kind of like what you see on Museum Drive, on the east side of Museum Drive, where lots back onto it. works good for an access standpoint, but developers really don't like those roads because they don't provide a lot of benefit to the developer for the cost that you see in that. So if that's truly what we want to see here, maybe that is a reason for the city to help foot some of the bill for that road and getting it in place.
Just a question for Mr. Schrank. On the zoning map, you showed the area as public, the ridge area. Who's the owner of that currently?
Currently, that would be split between NDSU and Dickinson Public Schools, and we actually have a slide coming up where we'll talk a little bit about some possibilities for that land. So we'll get there here shortly.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. I guess the other use that we talked a little bit about is this southwest corner. I'm not sure if this is currently being looked at in your event center feasibility study, but we did identify this may be a nice little piece of land for an event center. Hotels could kind of fill in around it. Restaurants could be a desirable piece for that. So something maybe you want to look into with them. So now we'll get into what Steve was hinting at. Here's our proposed future land uses. Again, mostly commercial on the west to kind of match what we've seen develop to the west of 30th. A little bit of commercial along 15th Street and State Avenue. Again, kind of matches what you see on the east side of State Avenue. Would be a good use at that busier intersection. Most of the east side we identified as residential. A little bit of mixed use, kind of buffering the two residential and commercial uses, and then the parkland that Steve was alluding to. Basically, the parkland that was chosen there because of the challenges with topography and water. It may be a fairly difficult and expensive piece of land to develop, so it may be more beneficial as parkland to developers. And the thought would be that would likely get dedicated to Parks and Rec. These tables provide a little bit of a breakdown of those land uses by subdivision. So the subdivisions you see here were each of the 5 lots that we laid out. We came up with just under 500 residential lots in this. If the school site developed, you'd have about 46 less lots, so around 450 lots for residential development. The bottom table shows land use by area. So commercial, we had about 31%. Mixed use was about 8%, residential 54%, and public was 7%. So I'm guessing where Steve was going with the public, right now your ordinance requires 7% of residential areas to be dedicated as parkland or cash in lieu. So we are over that amount, which again could be adjusted by developers as they develop that piece. But the other challenge is that the 7% is not by current owner. So if this Dickinson Public School piece comes in, we're not dedicating 7% of this large residential area. We just have a small corner. So they may need to look at some options. You know, if this piece comes in first, maybe we need to look at accepting cash in lieu for a portion of that and actually purchasing parkland from some of these other lots. I don't know if that's been done in the past or if that's something that would be interested in, but I think this is probably the best piece of parkland for the site. Does that help address your question, Steve? Okay. So that is essentially our presentation. I just wanted to throw a last slide in here to kind of summarize everything and maybe provide some potential discussion topics. So we'd love to hear any feedback you guys have on the site concept that was proposed. Roadways and access, especially, you know, we talked a little bit about the 15th Street west frontage. How do you feel about the frontage versus lots backing onto that and potential for city to help out in those costs? Future land uses, do they meet what you guys have in mind? And again, as this develops, you know, we could easily see those lines moving east, moving west. But again, just kind of a guide for what's to come. The drainage and stormwater management, if there's any comments with respect to the regional versus localized ponds that we talked about. Utilities, we did talk a little about the water pressures. We do recommend, and I think Craig may already be working on some studies on water pressures and sewer capacities for this area. The school site, I'm not sure if Dickinson Public Schools is here today, but again, we didn't have a lot of coordination. I think Craig probably had more than we did with them. So if there's any comments on that. And the parkland dedication, that the allocation of that parkland. So with that, I would turn it back over to you guys for any comments or discussion.
I think this was an excellent use of, to get this put out there so we can plan around this. If at some point, this land is going to take off again, you know, once we probably catch up. So I think this was a good use of some of the city resources to get this set, kind of laid out so we have an idea what that would look like. So you guys did an awesome job. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could too, it is an invaluable tool to help guide, and as Andrew said, it not necessarily needs to be cast in stone, but there are some critical points in there that we can pass on when someone comes into, say, my office or Craig's office and starts talking about development. And the development community, I'm sure, will embrace the fact that we've actually stepped forward and looked at this area, because we've actually saved the development community, for whoever it might be, a ton of preliminary work to move forward. And the other part of it is we do have, Craig and I visited on, we have a small handful of other locations in town that probably would benefit from this as well. So sometime down the road, we could also take a look at it. It's been a good exercise in working through this with Andrew and his firm, Mr. Kubis. It's made us kind of look at things together, and it's also opened our eyes a little bit, and it's great to have the input from the outside engineering community. We've included them in our subdivision review of the amendment of our ordinances and stuff. We are trying to work a little better with including the public and including the outside of the walls of City Hall in a lot of this, and this is a big step in that. We're showing basically the development community that we want to work with them by doing this. So thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, guys. It's been a fun project to work on. We had a lot of fun with it, and I hope it really helps guide this area and even some future policies to help make development just go a little smoother. So thank you, guys.
Mr. Chairman, if I could add just a couple of comments. Andrew had mentioned early on that they were, talking about some of the examples of, well, stormwater, here's the drainage, the watershed, and a pond really should go here, but there's two contributing landowners to that. And I think these are just, it's an invaluable exercise that provides us a great finished product too, but an exercise that you just have a hard time going through in your mind when you're looking at an ordinance and it's 50 sheets of paper going, well, how should we write this? What should really happen? How should we handle this instance? And this is just a great way to see it in a real world example, going, boy, maybe these folks should be paying for a pond that's not on their land. And so it's invaluable. And we are in the process of revising our stormwater ordinance. Right now, Apex is working on that. Andrew mentioned, talking about water and sewer modeling. Apex is also looking at that for this piece in particular. So we can really put a little more detail to this thing, as far as if we need to upsize some pipes. Because I think a piece of ground like this, while there's still some hurdles to get over as far as ownership and, state ownership especially, it's just such a well-situated piece of ground. The topography of it is so good. I can't imagine it won't be a highly sought-after piece of ground to develop. The last thing I would add is that in the past, when we did our comp plan, we approved that by ordinance, and that's filed and recorded. This, of course, goes into more detail, quite a bit more detail. Where our comp plan, looked at a bigger area, lines were kind of shown in generalities about where streets should go. This really looks at the topography and goes, hey, this is 15th Street, it has to be here. Some of these other streets, like Mr. Schrank mentioned, we have some flexibility, but this is a really great plan. And I think that the Century Code, I don't know if it requires us or it gives us the ability to record a master plan. And I haven't had a chance to talk with Ms. Wanko about this yet, but it says that the city may establish an official master plan of the municipality. That's maybe more like our comp plan. This is a master plan of a part of the municipality, so I don't know if it's something, if we wanted to take it as far as recording this document, I think we would have the ability to do that, but, you know, that might be down the road a little bit. We'll tweak it as we go here. So I want to thank, you know, first the city for funding this. I think it's been a great project, and I thank Highlands for doing such a great job on it. It's going to be a tool that I know we'll use with this land and moving forward on other pieces of ground. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Kubus. Commissioners, any other comments or questions from Mr. Schrank or staff?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you all.
All right. There's no action needed on this. This is just basically a discussion item, so we will move on. Our second work session item is an urban forestry quarterly update by Mr. Quam.
Oh, and I'm not sure how I can control my guides. There. Oh, I see, okay. Okay. Just continue on.
Oh, there's no PowerPoint? Yeah.
Pause for technical difficulties here.
Anyway, just to clarify, Mr. Chairman, what we're doing with this is that, you know, obviously you dealt with the urban forestry stuff in the past. We moved it to totally back to Public Works. We're just involved with it as far as consultation and mostly the downtown stuff. The quarterly updates is why Mr. Quam is here.
Did he ever put a board together?
I'm sorry, what?
Is there an urban forestry board now?
There is. There is. There's an urban forestry board. I've missed 2 of the 3 meetings because of other meetings they've had, but yes, Mr. Quam has taken that and run with it and organized it. And had a pretty good group of people actually serving on it to have some experience in urban forestry. Go ahead, Mr. Quam, sorry.
Did they find
Well, I guess my PowerPoint didn't get transferred over, so what you've got are the different reports that I've had from our activities during the last summer, and actually some of the planting survival for the last 2 years. And we've done some slides would have shown some of the areas that we've concentrated on doing some beautification. One area, of course, is the 2 planters that are up on I-94 and 3rd Street or 3rd Avenue and by T-Rex Park, if you're familiar with that. And what we did is we had some, when I inherited it, I found out about the middle of the summer that we took care of that, and there was the perennials that were planted there were struggling, and there was a lot of weeds. And so what we did is that year we put some annuals in real quick, get some splash of color for the other half of the summer. And then what we did this year is we're putting in weed barrier, or we amended the soils with compost, put weed barrier around the plantings, and put perennial flowers or daylilies in there so that we've got continuous splash of color and a lower weed problem so that we don't spend a lot of our time doing that. Another part I might just, or place I just might mention to you is also down on Broadway East and 6th Avenue. And the thing is there's a triangle there that was basically, has been, when I was there, inherited it, was just sprayed basically, and it was barren, dead grass, things like that in there. And so what we've done there is we actually went and amended the soils with compost and revived that area. We put a circular planting in there, planted an oak in the middle, and we're experimenting with some flowers around the outside. And so that's still in progress, but we've got grass established this fall, and so we're going to continue on with that site. And wood chips, we plan on putting that around the plantings. So again, just little things like that, we can start to dress up some of the ugly looking places in the city. If you're, the one plant report that you got, I've got two reports. One is called the 2018 Planting Survival, and that's up to date to this year. So that includes trees we planted the first year I was there. There was about 84 trees. And if you, the big thing is if you go down there, and I don't expect you to read all these things, but that's just for your background information on it. And we're seeing, you know, we also measured how the trees are doing, survivability, and the percentages. And that's going to make our evaluations from years to come as far as our ordering of trees, trees that are going to be doing well, and also analyzing why some species that should do well aren't doing well, and maybe just site specific. And so we're looking at that, and where you're seeing, you know, we're seeing a lot of trees like honey locust, northern acclaim honey locust, which is an NDSU variety, bur oak, hackberry, Ohio buckeye, spring snow crab, and some of those trees are 100% survival, some of our lindens. And so we're going to stand by a lot of those in our new plantings. Our plantings were quite substantial. Last year, we actually planted through most of the summer, and we had over 200 trees. We also got a number of smaller sized trees donated from the Soil Conservation District. They had some leftover trees, and so I made selections of trees that we could plant in a nursery area so that with our tree spade, we could tree spade those up later once they're sized for planting on the boulevard. So we can cut some of those costs. And I've been experimenting with a lot more different varieties of oak. Oak is seems to be, I've seen some of the best oak survival and trees in neighborhoods in Dickinson than I've seen statewide. And the thing is so we're going to be looking more at those, and their longevity is important as well, you know, that they're going to be there the long haul. Also, we're looking at disease-resistant elms, Dutch elm disease resistant, and bringing back the grandeur of the umbrella-shaped tree to our boulevards. There's also one nice thing about elms is they're fast-growing, and they also are up and over the streets, so we have less conflicts with pruning and things like that requirements. I also included a report from our Dutch elm disease losses, and there's two tables, and it shows the tables of our losses last year and our losses this year, or this last year and the year before, I should say, in 2018. We've got the biggest thing is when I first came here, I learned from my past experience that we need to go after the Siberian elms just as hard as we do the diseased American elms. A lot of people will say, well, Siberian elm isn't supposed to get Dutch elm disease, but I've seen it. And also, the thing is they have a number of other problems, and they can create beetle habitat for the trees as well, or for the Dutch elm disease to spread onto the American elm. So we're trying to reduce some of those. This last year, we had like 50 American elms we lost, to 2 Siberian elms. In 2008, it was only 20 trees we lost, and 8 Siberians. The other thing is that we did drain our budget basically this year. The year before, I had a little extra, but the thing is so we'll probably be putting that up in the next budget. We had bigger trees, larger American elms. It's really kind of sad to see the big ones go. And we're trying to do that. We reduced the losses in yards from 62 to 53 trees, American elms, and the overall losses was more American elms, even though we had only 148 trees we lost last year compared to 176 the year before. We had more American elms go and less Siberian elms. So I'm thinking as we keep up on that Siberian elm, getting those disease pockets out, as well as the American elm as we can, we'll see a decrease. It's just going to be variable where they are as far as in the yard or on our boulevard. So, and then I included a 4th report. This is just kind of another thing is I had 3 people last year, got whittled down in September to about 3 or 2, and they were quite successful. We sent them around. You'll see and notice a number of addresses, but there's also the different had them going around doing pruning, intersection visibility, alley vehicular clearance, traffic sign clearance, just dead trees on the boulevard that people just didn't take down. And so we just, probably had something else than Dutch elm disease, but we just got rid of them just because, a dead tree on a boulevard looks pretty ugly. And damaged branch, if it's hanging over or being a liability potential somewhere. And the growth over sidewalk and street use. So they got 43 calls in all, and the thing is and that was just in 1 month, which is pretty impressive. And I guess that's about all I have right now. Do you have anything else? I wish I had that slideshow because it's always nice to see something in color and see some of those places that were improved. Another one of the locations we did a planting at is also by Pizza Hut, where there was a kind of a teardrop development or patch there that we planted in trees and shrubs. So.
Vern, yeah, I do, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind. I just maybe to clarify a couple questions. Vern's done a great job as far as stepping in kind of a disjointed program, I would have to say, just because it was something that I was doing in part-time, just to organize it and keep it kind of rolling, at least on paper. So he's done a good job of jumping forward. Maybe, Vern, I have 3 things here I wrote down that maybe you could just address and kind of address the commission and just the public. Snow fence projects, you and I have talked about snow fence projects and new plantings and what we've had, throughout the years, a number of issues with obviously drifting, and you've identified, or we've discussed, and you've identified some areas where you're going to do some planting and snow fence.
Well, I know from the past, from talking with you and others, that middle school area that we just talked about, that area is a real problem, also on State Avenue, just north of the interstate. And the problem is if you have city-owned property or boulevard and you put a snow fence on there, that's really too close to the roadways, so it just ends up piling up more snow on the roadway. And then also, that the thing is it needs to be put back further, and that's where I think a lot of planning needs to be, or planning that includes planning or developing, putting in new developments along there, that there may be area that be dedicated to parks or somehow, and the trees planted back there in a living snow fence. I had last year at a booth at the home show, and I will have another one this year, hopefully. And I'm looking at putting up displays on what it's going to cost for a snow fence. A lot of people, when you talk about this and you just throw it around, without any dollars, you know, people can't really analyze how effective it's going to be. And trees, taking care of trees is you can minimize it by using weed barrier, and the soil conservation's been quite effective as far as promoting that in the last few years. But the thing is it's never a no maintenance type situation, so there's always some maintenance there. The one thing is what's nice is to get those trees up as quickly as possible, and then get them to a height where they're actually controlling the snow and putting that snow where it's out of the way. And you can do a lot of that by looking at, you know, if you got far enough setback, and if it's in the backyards of many houses, in a lot of cases, it's actually a landscape plus. And so we'll be putting that program, so I don't know if you're going to be at the home show, but you can be able to see some of the things that we've done there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I'm going to add to it just a little bit, and you can jump into it. We've also, you know, as Vern said, we've identified some places that publicly we've had some problems with drifting. I think the idea, and I think what you were planning on doing after we discussed, is planting a snow fence, planting some tree rows, probably staking that, and then also just utilizing some snow fencing, some typical plastic snow fencing, until those actually get established. And it would be almost kind of a demonstration project for what you're saying, that we would be doing, planting some smaller vegetation, having it grow, but also have a functional snow fence in that location that's the correct location.
Yeah.
So it actually works. So I think that's something that we're going to try to do too. Vern and I visited quite a bit. Poor guy tries to catch me every once in a while, and we sometimes hit it and sometimes miss. But we've had enough conversations that I think that, you know, he's just taking it and running it with it. That's
And
all.
I've had the discussions with Soil Conservation District, and they are a very willing partner, and that's about the most reasonable way of getting those established. And it would be nice to have a demonstration area where we could actually do that and actually get some results. But because when the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the next best time is now. So,
Okay, that was number one.
I stole that from somebody.
That was number one of three, sorry. You feel like you're in an interview?
No, that's fine.
Just ideas that maybe would help the public and also help this board understand. Discuss your urban forestry board, the makeup. You know, you have a really good makeup of people that have volunteered, stepped up, probably much better than they've ever had. Maybe just give these guys an idea of who's actually on there and what their involvement is.
Okay, we have, the people we have on there right now is Craig Pearson from Parks and Rec, and he's got a horticulture background and from NDSU, and so he's very interested and keen on those ideas, and they've had some struggles over there, and we've cooperated quite a bit with them. Bob Klein with the Soil Conservation District. One benefit that we achieved out of them this year was that instead of throwing the trees away that they had left over, they gave them to us, or gave us the opportunity to look through them. And so that's a big potential as well. And Then we have Jake Zettel, who's been on the committee, I think, many years. I'm not sure before, but he's with MDU, and he's been very supportive. They are a Tree Line USA designation from the National Arbor Day Foundation, and they have a program where they for energy efficiency, homeowners underneath Montana, Dakota can get free trees to plant in their yards. So the thing is that's through the National Arbor Day Foundation. But for us, he's on our committee, and we actually had an agreement this year to provide mulch in our compound area at buildings and sites, so that we could actually have it ready for tree planting. Also, Parks and Rec is there, so they can borrow if they need some for their tree planting. So it's a good cooperative program that we've had. Also, I've got representatives from Dickinson State University, and I'm happy to go. One of the goals I had when inviting them in is that I'd like to get them to be a Tree Campus USA designation. And of course, they can't meet it right now, but the thing is, it has helped them out as far as getting started, and they're getting their Dutch elm disease trees down more timely manner, and they're going to host an Arbor Day next spring, and I'll keep you guys all in mind, and invited. They're going to have a tree planting with the youth groups, and they plan on kicking it off. And in a few years, they hope to be a Tree Campus USA, which would make them the third in the state. NDSU is the first one, and then an Indian school or college. And now it would be nice to have Dickinson State, especially if I want to go back and brag when I go back to some of our urban forestry meetings in the state and say, hey, we've got one in our city now. So, they've been real active. From time to time, Walter stops in once in a while, and Gary Zuroff, my boss, and anybody that's welcome. We've had quite a few successful meetings. We've discussed it. We're on a bi-monthly basis. We meet, and I'm pretty excited. Next step, I want to talk to Joe Gar and see where the next steps are as far as us becoming an independent committee, and so we're going to go from there. Also, another exciting thing that we've got going on, I just met this week with representatives from Dakota Community Bank. They are interested in partnership with me this spring on Arbor Day. They're going to be 80 years old, and so they want to celebrate by planting an oak tree in every schoolyard. So I'm figuring about 15 schools would probably be going. It'll probably be a week long, three a day, but it'll be good promotion for them, good support from them. I've been really impressed with them, and I'm going to start more partnerships like that in the future and try to get more of that out there so that we can get some more trees in the ground. So, and the one thing that's so nice about that is that they said, we don't care what size of tree, we want one that's going to survive. And so the thing is it's going to run them quite a bill, but the thing is that they want something that's going to be there down the road for the future for these kids. They want to contribute back to the community. So
That's great.
Wonderful.
So,
Okay, last but not least. Vern and I, when he first started, talked about our entry. The city's been talking about welcome to Dickinson signs and entry signs for quite some time. And Vern and I have I've identified some locations, and he's been kind of moving forward on what a design would be, how it would work. I don't know that we'll have it done in 2020, but it is something that is on the table again. It was very important to former commissions to do, and former planning commissions. So it is something that we're going to kind of try to put together and scraped together. With that, 2020 projects, big ones that places that you're going to see, what are you doing with that? And
Well,
be
I
quiet.
tell you what, we're actually moving a lot longer than what it sounds like. But the thing is I applied for a grant last year with the North Dakota Forest Service for tree planting. And I also applied for a grant for intern for getting a tree inventory on the boulevards. And I got the one for the intern, so we'll have that starting and hopefully getting that trained and that put into our computer. The second one was on the beautification plan. Well, the city commission was awful good in giving us half of that money, but I didn't get the grant for the other part. So we got half, $10,000. And the thing is 3 plantings we're looking at. One is on 20th Street, and we're looking at those in the medians where there's some crab apples planted there. And I want to, trees out there in the open like that have a struggle. If you put shrubs around them, they tend to be more of a companion plant, and so they keep the weeds down, and we're going to use weed barrier, but we also want to strive for more color for during the summer and in the fall, and then possibly also in the winter time. And so the thing is we're hoping that's going to blossom out. And we've talked about signs. I've been looking at prices on signs with Dee in our sign shop, and so she's going to get them back to me. It's the one thing is if it's a sign out there, the thing is it's got to be 7 foot up in the air, and that kind of detracts from the beautification. So we're probably going to look at something different or just subliminal. And I think we do have a Tree City USA sign out there. The other location, I've been looking up and down at the different areas, and 3rd Avenue North, all the way from what is that place? The nursing home on the east side, south of the flower shop anyway, on that street, on 3rd Avenue, all the way north. It really could use a lot of color. And when people mention color, that's flowering seasonal colors. And so I'm looking at that, and I pinpointed T-Rex Park. When you look at that, you see the rusty dinosaur, and I mean, it's interesting. Sculptures are interesting, but you got the flag poles up there, and I'd like to get a 3rd one up there with the Tree City USA flag. So many people have the American and the North Dakota flag, but there's not that 3rd one for the Tree City USA, and I think we need to broadcast that. Plus, we've got some evergreens I want to put behind the flag poles so that they screen the backgrounds, and also plant in there. And then I'm looking at some flowering crabs, so you'll have some red and some white flowering there in the spring, so it'll be full. And I've talked with Craig Pearson, because it's actually technically parks, and but they're all game for it. He says that I would like to see that one on there. And the 3rd one is actually down on South Main. It's got lots of trees there. They've been suffering. I know that the tornado went through there and tore out a lot of them. And so the thing is there is a welcome sign down there. Around that area, I want to enhance it again with some evergreens, just to give it some winter color. Right now, it's all green ash predominantly, and it just doesn't have the color that it could winter colors. And so we're looking at evergreens and some flowering crabs. So those are the 3 beautification plantings that I got, plus the ones that we're just tweaking, like that little corner triangle project and wherever else. Oh, we're also looking at the North Trail on 10th Street and 21st. And along there, we've started planting some trees. There's a park bench up there, and we've started going around there, and I'm still plugging along with that. We're also it's a potential for a heritage grant from the Soil Conservation District or through the state, I guess, but they handle the paperwork and stuff. And so next year, that might be a good project. I've talked with Bob about that.
Thank you very much, sir, for all your work.
Okay.
I'll be
any-
quiet now.
Any questions for Mr. Qualm before he steps away? All right, thank you.
Okay, and I'll keep you in mind on Arbor Day. And
You have
we
this
should have
many
enough of them
shovels?
around that, maybe we could get one commissioner on at each school location or something like that.
You have 7 shovels, Vern?
I'll buy them.
Sounds good.
I'll leave them, paint them gold. I did that one year in Jamestown.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 5, items not on the agenda. Does anybody have anything they would like to discuss that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to item 6, public issues of concern, of city concern not on the agenda. Anybody in the public have any comments they would like to make at this time? Doesn't look like it. We'll close that part. Last one would be a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
We are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.